All right, thank you. Um, it is great to see everyone, and I'm just gonna switch my view so I can see everybody. Hmm. All right, there are so many old friends and new friends here. It's a pleasure to be here on a Thursday night. I am usually at a rehearsal on Thursday nights, and so this is a really wonderful chance to join everyone for this evening practice. And I'm sorry if my voice is a little soft or rough. We're getting over a wave of COVID in the house here, and everybody is fine. And it wasn't so bad, but we did. I lost my voice, and we had some tough days. But it has been a gorgeous week here on the Cape. It's spring for the briefest of moments. It comes very late out here and leaves almost right away. And so we've been enjoying starting to feel better as this kind of riot of spring has just appeared. Those of you who have sat with us here in Hyannis, which is where I'm joining you from Cape Cod, know that we're up against a marsh here in the back, and beyond the marsh is the ocean. And so just now we're getting the leaves are starting to bud on the trees, but you can still see the marsh and beyond that the ocean. And it's kind of this really fecund time where everything is coming to life. And on the way in, our neighbor's cherry tree has bloomed over the last week in this kind of riot of pink. And the tree dropped all her petals just yesterday and today. So you walk in this carpet of beautiful, like you're in this royal procession when you walk down the driveway. It's quite amazing. And so I was sitting this morning out in this kind of foggy, cool spring day, watching the marsh and listening to the bird life and the insects that are just starting to come out. And I was reading this story in the newspaper by David Wallace Wells, who is a journalist who writes about climate change, writes really eloquently about it. And this story was on extreme heat. Um, and he was recounting this dire situation that we're in. Forest fires that we're all aware of, this heat wave last year, 70 degrees above normal in Antarctica. The heat dome that happened over British Columbia, and these thousands and thousands of heat deaths that have been going on in different parts of the world. And in this article, David Wallace Wells focused on a heat wave that's engulfing northern India and Pakistan right now. There's a Tamil word called Agni Nachatiram, uh, which is translates as burning star, or I've also heard it translated as sky on fire, something like that. And it refers to this time of year in South India, in the state of Tamil Nadu. And it's this May, June period of extreme heat before the monsoon comes and cools things off. And I spent some time in South India studying music and was, I guess, fortunate to spend one Agni Nacharam in Chennai, one of these really hot periods. And it was extraordinary. And this was not an extraordinary year, but I recall weeks where during the day, the only thing you could really do was just sort of lay down on the cement floor, or the only thing I could do was lay down on the concrete floor in the apartment and sit in front of the fan and sweat all day. And then, later in the evening, maybe you could go out and do something. But during the day, if you didn't have to, you did nothing. And that was what would happen during this period. And it's in the Hindu calendar a very inauspicious time to do anything. because of the weather most likely, but you know, you wouldn't get married during this time or start a new business or anything like that. And it was just too hot to work, to play music, to read, to really do anything. And this year, during this heat wave, it's much worse. In North India, they've recorded temperatures at 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and in Pakistan, 120 degrees. Um, and they are projected to reach 50 degrees Celsius, which is, I think, 122 degrees in the next, weeks or so. And so this temperature is hovering around really dangerous wet bulb temperatures, which is a term I just learned. It's a measurement of the temperature that takes into account humidity and heat. And so in the subcontinent, in this area of South Asia, the wet bulb temperatures have been surpassing the level of human survivability. And that's how it's talked about, that if you are out in this weather, you will possibly die. It goes beyond what the human body can tolerate. And along with the human deaths, of course, many animals have been dying, especially marine life with the rising temperatures in the seas. And it's been reported that birds have been falling out of the sky from this heat. Just extraordinary. And while everyone is affected by this heat, of course, it affects mostly the poor and the people who have to work outside and children, people without access to air conditioning, or even in many cases without access to fans. And in one section of the article I was reading, Wallace Wells talks about a school that is meeting, I think it was in New Delhi, this very poor school that is set up under a bridge, under a highway overpass. And they don't have fans or electricity. And there's a photo of the board stuck to this concrete wall, very difficult. And the students are there and the teachers are there, and they're making do, walking back and forth to the one tap to drink water and to try to stay safe and alive. And in India and all over the world, it's there's an intersection of environmental catastrophe with economic injustice, with poverty, with racism or casteism here, and this racial injustice. These things intersect and affect the most vulnerable first. In the article, Wells quotes Dr. Friederike Otto, who is a leading climate scientist, who said, I think we don't actually know what this new normal or emerging normal will feel like, because the temperature and greenhouse gases have increased so fast, and by so much over just the last decade, that we haven't really had time to experience what this means. And we are starting to witness events that would not have been possible, that we could not really imagine to be possible without climate change. And the point of this article, which is spelled out in the title, which is, can you even call deadly heat extreme anymore? And the point is that the heat wave and the deaths in South Asia are fast becoming, or have already become, normal. And so I was sitting out back here in this beautiful space, in this cool weather with sprouting leaves and drizzle. And it took a lot of effort to read through this long article. It was so overwhelming. And it felt like despair was sort of the only response that could come to me. Or maybe running away. That seemed like the other option, to run for some comfort. And of course, I was reading this article on my phone, so the phone is an endless well of comfort food. designed just for that. And then I thought of a story Jisei told a few weeks ago about her, I think it was your grandson, Jisei, who was starting second grade. And for the first week or two of class, when they went into the building, he wanted the comfort of first grade and went running. I have this image of him running and tearing away to this, safe space, the first grade space that's known. And it made sense to me. I think we can all relate to that. And so I sat with this reality in the backyard of this immense, massive suffering going on and the beauty of this space. And I was thinking about how our practice and our teachings can help me not run away, and to bear witness and see how our practice can work to alleviate this suffering, this sort of unbelievable level of suffering that is in the world today. The second pure precept in the Zen Peacemaker order reads, bearing witness to the joy and suffering of the world. This is doing good. And so out here at Hyannis Zendo, we read the precepts together once a month, and they often come up in discussions. And I have to admit, when I think of this second pure precept, I usually focused on the suffering part, bearing witness to the suffering in the world. This is doing good. And, suffering is given a prime place in our practice, the Buddha's first noble truth. We pay a lot of attention to suffering. And I found myself reading that precept today and thinking, wow, I shouldn't really gloss over the joy part of this. This is important, bearing witness to the joy in the world. Now, this is doing good. When I first took precepts, Enkyo Roshi gave me the Dharma name Etsudo, joyful way. And that practice of a joyful way has also been part of my practice in the midst of this world. And so when we bear witness to the joy, the cherry tree, right, this beautiful path, these faces coming together today to sit and practice together, and this is doing good. And this is where part of our practice energy comes from, what revitalizes us and lets us be present for the world, sharing the joys of others, the joy of the world. And this is one of the 4 divine abodes in Buddhism, known as mudita, the abode of joy, or rejoicing, or being delighted in the world. And mudita pairs with karuna, deep compassion. And this compassion is a natural response when we see suffering clearly, when we hear the cries of the world with an open heart and mind, when we embody Avalokiteshvara's vow to save all beings. And so doing good necessitates the awareness of this immense suffering, not running away in the world and not running away from this suffering in ourselves. And it's also necessitates a deep connection to the joy and delight that's available to us when we stop running. So in the face of this suffering, how do we not get overwhelmed? How do we not fall into despair? And so it might be a little bit too on the nose, but a koan from the Blue Cliff record keeps coming up for me, the koan of Dongshan's no cold or heat. And in this koan, a monk asks Master Dongshan, when cold and heat come, how can we avoid them? Shan says, why don't you go to the place where there is no heat no cold or heat. The monk said, "What is the place where there is no cold or heat?" Dongshan said, "When it's cold, the cold kills you. When it's hot, the heat kills you." So what is this monk asking when he says, when cold and heat come, how can we avoid them? How do we avoid suffering? How can we cope with the suffering we see around us, the suffering we feel in us, this heat of anger, the pain of loss and sickness, the despair of feeling like we don't have enough, or maybe we're not enough in ourselves. All the problems, the politics, family, work, all these things. And this monk's question to me feels really sincere. He's opening his heart to his teacher. But the question is also challenging. It falls into difference, into grasping, into pushing away, right? Pushing away cold and heat, chasing relief. Dogen Zenji says about this, even if you try millions of times to avoid cold or heat, it's like trying to put a tail where the head is. And seeing this monk's initial mistake, Dongshan suggests, why don't you go to a place where there's no cold or heat? He's pointing to a place of oneness, the place where nothing affects you because there's no separation. It's abiding in a place of no thing. Difference drops away. And maybe we taste this once in a while in our zazen. Our thinking mind pauses, meditation is quiet. Yuan Wu comments on this place, saying, the world's peoples can't find it. In oneness, there's no space for the world's people, and there's nothing to find. Yuan Wu likens it to a shadow and says Dongshan is a con man selling a bogus city of silver. So why is this place with no heat or no cold not right? Why is it not the place to stay? And if we settle there in oneness, this is what we call dead Zen. It's like the hermit, the story of the hermit who is tested by the old woman. So having built a hermitage to support this hermit for 20 years, the old woman sent out a beautiful young woman to test him. And on the old woman's instructions, this young woman went to the hermit and gave him a hug and then asked, "How are you?" And the hermit said, "A dead tree on a cold cliff in winter, no warmth." And when the young woman reported this back to the patron, the older woman kicked him out and she burned down his hermitage. This hermit was stuck in the place of no heat. Right? How can we help when there's no people, no suffering and no compassionate response, no joy, no sharing in the beauty of life? Staying in this place of no heat and no cold is just deadness. So when the monk probes further, where is the place where there's no heat and no cold? Dongshan says, when it's cold, the cold kills you. When it's hot, the heat kills you. He's pointing directly at our encounter with life, directly at this moment. Dogen tells us that this killing, this demolishing, is how it is when the moment of cold arrives, when the moment of heat arrives. When it is hot, heat demolishes the monk. The monk's question is this study of the moment of heat. Dongshan's answer, when it's hot, the heat demolishes the monk, shows how it is when this moment arrives, this moment right now. So who is killed and who is demolished? In his book, The Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, Thich Nhat Hanh points us towards the Diamond Sutra as inspiration for activism and climate activism in particular. And he writes that the sutra urges meditators to throw away four notions: notion of self, of human being, of living beings, and the notion of lifespan. And when these are thrown away, when they're demolished, we become free to encounter the world, to hear what the world is teaching us in this moment, in this encounter. So early in Dongshan's training, he asked his teacher Yunyan, who can hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma? And Yunyan said, the non-sentient can hear it. Dongshan asked, can you hear it, teacher? And Yunyan replied, if I heard it, you could not hear me preach the Dharma. And then Yunyan replies, if I heard it, you could not hear me preach the Dharma. Dongshan said, in that case, Dongshan doesn't hear you preach the Dharma. And Yunyan replies, if you still don't hear me preach the Dharma, how much less can you hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma? And at this, Dongshan had his insight and recited, wonderful, wonderful. The preaching of the Dharma by the non-sentient is inconceivable. If you try to hear it with your ears, it's hard to understand. When you listen with your mind's eye, then you know it. So Dogen commented on this koan as well, and he tells us to investigate this question in detail throughout your life, throughout many lives. The question, who can hear the non-sentient preach the Dharma, can work as a statement. The statement is the skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. So when we encounter devastating heat, we encounter devastating heat. It's fully there. We lay on the concrete floor and sweat. When we bear witness to this extreme heat going on today in India, without turning away, without grasping after something else, we can hear the heat preaching the Dharma. And it's preaching a call for action. And we recognize that the planet itself is speaking the Dharma as it is today. And bearing witness to this, we have to respond. And so what does this response look like, this bodhisattva action? Well, here it means joining with our neighbors to preserve the last green space in Hyannis, organizing, sending emails, working towards renewable resources in the Zendo here and in our town. And it means paying attention and looking for ways to participate, to be part of this community. And of course, the record heat waves are part of a much larger climate crisis that's not separate from social, political, health, and economic injustice. And this leaves so much of the world's population in precarious living situations, in immense suffering. And at the same time, we're living in this world that is so filled with light and joy. This moment to be together, to breathe together, to practice, to be aware of spring unfolding here in New England. And our practice sustains us when we're not caught in notions of success or failure. And our practice is exactly that, not getting caught in our notions. You know, we have a lot of experience with this as meditators. In fact, it seems like our practice maybe is geared exactly to this moment in time, this moment of crisis in the world. Dongshan's teaching of no cold and no heat is dramatic. It allows us to throw things away, to throw away our clinging to these ideas of self and separateness, while still moving forward with direct action. Yunyan said to his student Dongshan, haven't you seen that in the Amitabha Sutra it says the lakes and the rivers, the birds, the forests, they all chant Buddha. They all chant Dharma. So this burning sky in May is preaching the Dharma. The heat and the suffering too, along with the cherry blossoms falling and showering us in their beauty. Inquiry and response, looking deeply and right action come up together. This is our practice. This is loving myself and others, doing good for others. So thank you for your practice today. It's really wonderful to sit with you.